As economies around the world start to reopen, one of the issues facing businesses is whether to bring everyone back to the office, continue working from home, or implement some kind of a hybrid work format. Most people want to work from home at least some of the time. But how can leadership manage to keep teams engaged and productivity up to speed when everyone seems to be working in different places and on different schedules? And will what worked when people were trying to get through the pandemic crisis still be effective now that it looks like we're finally heading back to normal? Hi, I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for joining me here on A Seat at the Table. It's great to have your company today. You're an important part of our global community, which has now grown to include 96 countries. I hope that you're enjoying listening to the many outstanding people who are guests on the show. I always learn so much from each person, and I hope you do too. We've added a new feature to this program, and I'll be telling you more about it at the end of the podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Sophie Wade, an authority on the future of work, host of the Transforming Work podcast, and author of Empathy Works, which focuses on providing a human-centric framework to help businesses grow in an era when the way we work is changing. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, Sophie talks about ways to support employees and managers in a hybrid work environment, burnout at the employee and leadership levels and what to do about it, and how the new workplace will be more human-centric. Before we get started, if you're a supply chain executive who'd like to finally put an end to information overload and get a simple, concise summary of key market developments and shifts, then the current situation in sourcing is exactly what you're looking for. To get immediate access, head on over to thecurrentsituation.net. That's thecurrentsituation.net, where you can get all of the details. There'll also be links in the show notes for this episode. Now, let's get down to business and find out what the future of work could look like. Sophie, I'm really excited to have you on the show because dealing with what they call the Great Resignation, dealing with the fact that employees seem to be particularly unhappy, disengaged, people are under a lot of stress right now. I think all companies, right, across just about all geographic areas, large companies, small companies, everyone is facing this dilemma. We've had other people on the show talking about other aspects of this, but I think you bring a very interesting perspective to the table.
I hope to. I've been in this space dealing with the sort of the greater umbrella of workplace flexibility, and which means really looking at how we're working and how we can work more effectively for both to be sort of be engaging people and being able to work more effectively, but also being able to have our lives and professional and personal lives fit together better so that we are less distracted, we are less stressed out, and can actually be sort of focused much more on our work. So I do think that this is a win-win if we can get this right.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that everyone is struggling one way or another to try to figure out what they need to do to get that right. And a lot of attention has been placed on what you might call more anywhere from entry level up to about mid-level or upper mid-level jobs, people quitting and so forth. But there hasn't been as much attention focused on the pressures that people in more senior leadership positions face. From your point of view, how much of an issue is burnout at these levels?
Look, I think we've launched into an unprecedented period of change and inflection. We were, prior to the pandemic, really struggling to adapt for the future of work, which we knew was coming, but it didn't have the urgency. Digital transformation had been challenging. People didn't want to do it because their competitors weren't doing it. And then the pandemic happened, which really kind of got us launched into the future of work. The future of work arrived in 2020. And that comes with it, not just all the challenges of dealing with trying to, have our businesses survive during the pandemic, but now, where do we go from here? There was no back to go back to. So the pressures for leaders to try and work out what next, there isn't a sort of nice game plan. We haven't had years. We can't use lots of economic data from decades of history past to project forwards. And that, in addition to trying to move forward and trying to work out how to deal with the post-pandemic world, the pressures to run our businesses and do that and work all that stuff out at the same time, it's huge. And I think it goes through leaders throughout the organization trying to sort of work out the sort of new rules of engagement in a very, very different business environment.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, everything, like you said, came at once. So we didn't have the luxury, right, to be able to plan and decide we're going to bring this in, right, over the next 3 to 5 years. It's
Right.
now. So we've thrown in sort of into the deep water and having to learn how to swim.
And the challenge is that the sort of parameters of this new era of work really are that it's less predictable, it's much faster paced, it's super interconnected. Consumers, we know that our own behaviors are changing, and therefore, obviously, when we're thinking about our own customers and prospects, their behaviors are changing, and then our competitors are implementing new technologies, which then changes how they're delivering their service, and we're having to keep iterating and keep changing. So there isn't a sort of like, oh yes, well, once we've done that, well, then we can sort of settle down and everything's going to be on cruise control again. It's going to keep changing. It's going to keep evolving for several years to come, at least. And so understanding how we can sort of set ourselves up in a very new way, not with these sort of fixed structures, but much more flexible frameworks to be able to move ahead effectively. There are so many different aspects to the sort of the building blocks, so to speak, the flexible building blocks of the way forward. And that's a lot to think about. I mean, the good news, a silver lining of the pandemic is those ways that we rallied to pivot and deal with extraordinary change that was sort of hitting us from every side. Those are some of the ways that we've learned how to work, and that is beneficial going forward. Not as extreme as we've dealt with in the 2020 and 2021, but using some of those learnings, I think, are what we can use to move forward with less volatility, but still a quite dynamic environment.
I think, yes, that's definitely what we're seeing happening. And it's interesting because in many countries, they've, in a sense, drawn a line under the pandemic. And we're starting to see companies reopening and bringing people back into the office and so forth. And yet, on the other hand, there's a certain amount of pressure, right, from employees who were working from home and liked it, right? Some people working from home and didn't like it and can't wait to get back into the office. And other people don't want to actually have to go into the office, or maybe not into the office every single day. How do you see leadership being able to manage and be effective in what will be a hybrid workplace for many companies, maybe not forever, but for certainly a prolonged period of time?
I think very, very few people in this world want to work in the office 100% of the time. I think lots of people want to be in the office some part of the week, or maybe a couple of weeks at a time, and then be working on a project from home, depending on what their needs are, or working from a third place, because so many people have very long commutes, right, and which completely waste their time, waste their concentration and energy. So I do think that there are very few people who want to be. There are certainly people who need to be on site when they have fixed site jobs, and there is some different flexibility can be given to them. I think I do see this as being not something that's long-term, but absolutely permanent, because one of the new characteristics of this new era of work, of this highly digitalized new business environment, which is not going to change. We're not going to go back to less technologically integrated, and that is what is determining how fast we have to work and how adaptable and flexible we have to be. Now, if we have to be that flexible, we also need, as leaders, we need our employees to be that flexible, and we need much more out of them than we ever had.
True.
And we need them engaged. And if we're going to get them engaged, we're going to need them to sort of do their best work. We really have to be helping them do work where they work best and at the times that they work best, whether it's flexible hours, really helping them sort of optimize for their what I call optimal working profiles. Like, what are their preferences? Trying to get, if they have obligations, make sure that they can deal with those family obligations so they can really focus intently on their work when they're working. So I see this as being absolutely a permanent situation. This has been a long time coming. It has been evolving and getting there. I started in workplace flexibility 11 years ago. And so it's been enabled by technology and is something that is completely logical. That said, for leaders, 100% working from the office or 100% working remotely. Those are the two easiest scenarios.
Right.
Having a scenario where people are working, part in the office, part here, part there, that is harder to organize, to set up, to design for your organization, because it can be not necessarily fluid, but it can change from week to week and depending on sort of what the parameters of your business are. But it certainly is doable. And whilst it may feel unmanageable and it may feel, I think many leaders want to get their arms around things and kind of like, okay, let's like restore order, like get back. But it's like, that isn't going to get the most out of your employees. So if particularly on a unit by unit basis, people can, with the manager, with their immediate team, that's the easiest way to manage sort of what that particular team does and how they can sort of sort out and compromise among their different needs so that they can do their best work and achieve. And if we're focused on results, then that's going to be the way to sort of have people not focus on whether they're really in person. So I think there are, and yes, equitable participation and promotions and stuff like that is definitely an issue which we need to address. So hybrid is harder, definitely harder, but I think we can get a, it doesn't sound bad, but we can engage employees much more, not get a lot out of them, but we can engage employees much more and they can be enjoying and participating much more in their working life as well as their personal life for benefits all around.
I think that's a very critical point that companies are struggling with, because you're right. People definitely optimally want to have employees who are happy, who are engaged. And yet at the same time, company has to be productive and they have to be seeing a return on the investment that they're making in salary or compensation to employees, which for some companies has been easier to manage, right? In the tech sector, they've been doing this well before there was ever a pandemic. But in other sectors, when I speak to people in management roles, they say, it's challenging. You have some people who are very capable of working from home and being just as effective, or even maybe more so than in the office. But then you have other employees where you're not getting that level of productivity. It's just, there's too many distractions. So it's.
Well, I would say that some of those people who get very distracted, they're distracted in the office as well. Some of those people, they need a lot more oversight. And it's not necessarily that they can't work from home. I do think there aren't that many really good managers. And that hasn't mattered as much when everybody was in the office. And so management was more, you could be a little bit more random and still be productive, get the results. But when you're working in a more complicated, more dynamic situation, the management skills really need to be sort of elevated, and people do need to be trained because each person really needs to be managed individually.
Right.
Some people are very independent, some people need a lot of oversight. And how you're dealing with them and the sort of sensitivity and all of those differences show up that much more when people are working their own individual scenarios and have different schedules. So I do think there is a lot more management training that will be beneficial. And then some of these changes, because, when you're sort of saying, well, getting a return on the compensation, like if people are engaged, they will be more productive. They will more easily produce the results that are required, desired and required these days. So I do think having the right oversight and also sharing more responsibility. We're needing, at the pace that we're working now, we need to be pushing some of the decision making much, much closer to the front line, because there just simply isn't time to wait for the data to go all the way up to the top, have, more strategic committees and stuff like that, and then have the data come back down with, strategies and tactics. So sharing that responsibility. And I talk a lot about empathy because which is really about human understanding. And so the more that you can understand your managers, and managers can understand their team members and understand what responsibility that they're ready for, what decisions they're capable of making, how to manage them, and being able to really give them the oversight that they need on an individual basis. I think that's when you get the results that are going to be make a big difference in the world that we're looking at now.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting point. But from the point of view of leadership, if you have people who are making their own hours, so to speak, does that not expand the amount of time and effort for leadership? And like you said, having to manage each person on more an individual basis. I mean, yes, there is the other extreme where you could be sort of a lax manager because everybody was, on site. It was a little bit easier, but now have we really pushed that to the other extreme by saying, well, you have people who are working early morning, you have people who are working late at night. Everybody needs to be able to get feedback from their manager, or from leadership. And now your hours just seem endless and you're having to customize everything you do on a, one by one basis. How do you, in a sense, sort of draw a fence around that, be able to achieve what you're talking about, but at the same time, put a fence around it for your different senior management?
Well, boundaries, yes, absolutely are very important. It's a question of understanding each person and just working out what's going to be the best solution for that. It doesn't mean that there are endless hours. It means because if somebody is really, really great at working early in the morning and another person on your team is great at working late at night, that doesn't mean that you have to give them feedback early in the morning or late at night. It doesn't mean you have endless hours. It's a question of understanding when they can do their best, particularly focused work, and then having times that they know you're available. Let's just say, the CMO of a company, Workfront, she was a remote leader. She was the CMO remotely for many years. And the way that she did it is she had a Slack channel which showed whether she was available or not. She had times on her calendar, and she basically said, anytime you want to drop in and you see that I'm free, and I'm on Slack, I'm online, just drop by and ask me questions. So there are many ways to set it up. And you can have chat channels which are asynchronous, in the same way as Slack. So you can be asking questions. And when that leader has time, then they can go in, does, Mary or John need anything? And then they can ask and answer them. So there are a lot more tools and there's a lot more use of asynchronous communication because I don't have to give feedback live unless it's something very specific. And once we really optimize, I think one of the key things about the way we're working now is it's really understanding the tools and being intentional and purposeful about how we work. We've never had to pay attention to that, how we work best, but also how we're doing accomplishing our tasks. And when we do, it actually reduces the amount of time and it increases the effectiveness of everything that we're doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very true. There's a lot of tools that have been developed, and certainly they've served us very well during the pandemic when that was the only option. But how do you keep that personal connection if you're dealing with asynchronous communication, where people can leave a question, you can reply by chat and so forth, but it's not the same as that connection, that bond that's built, right? By going into your manager's office and sitting down together and talking about the problem, and then you sometimes end up diverging and talking about other things, right?
Right. Well, I think those can be done both virtually and in person. And I think both of those, to have some of that non-work chat time it needs to be intentionally set into put into the schedule. And there are many companies that have mandatory non-work conversations. They were doing that before the pandemic. And obviously many of them, really set that up very, very carefully or just like available. We can chat about work, issues. We can chat about, our favorites, binge watched TV series, no matter what, because those relationships, yes, absolutely. They're incredibly important. And so the more that I understand you and we have connections, the easier it is for me to understand who you are and how to manage you or how to interact with you as my boss. So those are those type of relationships we absolutely need to lean into. And those can be done, as I said, both virtually, but also, yes, scheduling, whether it's sort of regular retreats, in-person collaboration. I was just talking with the CEO of a company and 7,000 people. They're all remote, but
Wow.
they've also set up, they went remote, March 2020 and are staying that way, but they also have collaboration centers. So they have these places because obviously collaboration can happen virtually, but they also have got fixed places where people can come in and have these collaboration times, which are both really good for brainstorming, but also for some of those really key times to develop relationships and have that casual time when I sort of connect more with you as a person.
That's a really interesting concept. Tell me a bit more about how that works. I mean, are there fixed hours when people have to be there? Is it more like a lounge type environment, or is it actual desks?
I literally heard about, was talking to him yesterday. So I don't know the specifics of it, but for sure, I would say that there would be no fixed hours, because the idea about working in collaborative ways in this new environment and having that flexibility sort of baked in means that there are very few things that are fixed on a regular basis. It would be, when do we need to go in there? We have a team, we've got to kick off. I know that Philips Engineering Solutions, they've been innovating remotely, not sort of working from home, but they have teams, innovation teams spread across the world. They've been doing that for years and years. One of the things that I was talking to the head of innovation there, and he said their kickoffs would be in person, but then most other things would be remote, because the people are in India and Europe and States, working around the world. So, but they did. And so that was one thing that they had to work out a new solution during the pandemic, because that kickoff couldn't be done in person. So I think trying to work out what sort of cadence of using virtual tools and using in-person gatherings is something that you need to work out for your team, your unit, your department, your company, depending on the different projects and tasks that are involved. So it takes a lot more thought to sort of work out what's going to work and then schedule it accordingly.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does take a lot more planning. You have to be a lot more intentional, whereas for better or worse, right, when you're working in an office, everyone's there, so you can just have an impromptu meeting. But then again, you could also be wasting time on too many meetings or things that you don't really need because you didn't think about whether you actually really needed to do it.
Well, I have a huge bugaboo now about meetings, and which I actually sort of mentioned in my new book, which is that meetings, and I forget the date, but we went, I think over the last 30 years, we went from 10 hours of meetings a week to 23 hours. 23 hours is a
really?
lot.
Wow.
Yep. And how many of those meetings are those impromptu? And if we set it up formally, but we only really needed to deal with one thing, then we've taken up the time of 2 or 3 people, or maybe more. And they could have been doing something else instead. Just talking to a very interesting guy who has a company Tactic, and they sort of have management solutions for hybrid models. But the key thing is, he was talking about what they do for their company. They record every meeting.
Wow.
They record it, and they also have notes which are sort of logged in terms of the key issues. And you can also do the search. You can do a search of the video to see, what was going on. So it means that I don't have to go to that meeting. I know that I can catch up with somebody afterwards, but I can also just do a keyword search and see if something that I really care about was discussed. That really saves my time. Now, these are the things I think we need to be incredibly intentional about meetings, because if we have to include a lot of people who don't really need to be there, because we don't want to feel that we don't want them to feel excluded. We might need them, who knows? That's where we just get all meetinged out or Zoom burned out. I think really being thoughtful about meetings, having them be productive, making sure there's an agenda beforehand, and a really good meeting protocol for making sure that it's effective and achieves the objectives that were set out will help a lot.
I would agree. I think that when you have to look at it from that point of view, and especially if everybody isn't on site, you're now asking someone, granted they're on the payroll, but you are asking them to make the effort to come in and show up for this meeting. There is a little bit more pressure to have a more well-defined agenda and really think about, is this the best use of everybody's time? So I think that could be a very good outcome from all of this. That could be a productivity boost, right? Even though
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that concern when people are working remotely, as we touched on earlier, that you lose productivity.
I think that for the most part, I mean, certainly before there was a lot of burnout, the productivity increases that were seen were, surprised a lot of people because productivity did not fall off the edge of a cliff when people started working from home. They were actually, I mean, we were dealing with an emergency and a crisis, but it was clear that, most people could work very productively from home and did not need to be in the office once they were, appropriately tasked with what they needed to do and had the tools and support that they needed to do it. So, and I do think that people who are really super and really not productive, they're not productive in the office or from home. It does
Right.
require, I mean, if they're going to be standing by the water cooler the whole time, they're going to be making, 10 cups of tea when they're at home. So I think it really does speak then to management and leadership to be focused on results. And if you're focused on results and then helping somebody achieve their results, and they might need lots of milestones, they might be kind of like, it may be with you that I just give you a deadline, I give you the task, and I'll see you in a month and that'll be fine. And I know that's cool. And you will ask me if there are any issues. Younger folks often don't necessarily feel comfortable asking those questions. And so it might need that I really deliberately did check in quite frequently. And we're now going to the sort of much more weekly check-ins, brief check-ins, particularly when things are changing so much, to make sure that I'm drawing out kind of like, how's it going? And really trying to read your face and check on your emails, kind of like, okay, she seems a little bit hesitant. Does that mean there's something going on at home? Or is it that she might have an issue with the project? And let me try and draw her out and give her the building blocks or some guidance about how to be effective in work. Because I think that's one of the things that we haven't, I think some of the older generations haven't recognized how much work has changed, how non-linear it is now. We're dealing with many more projects. It's much less routine, and therefore giving some guidance, not micromanaging, but guidance about how to do it effectively does help the younger people, particularly if they're not in the office as much, to be productive and channel their energies.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really interesting point, and that is for your younger employees who now are working remotely, how difficult is it for them to get that sort of what you might call casual learning, mentorship, whatever, that you'd get in an office where there might be someone a little bit more experienced than you that you could ask a quick question to? You may not want to, schedule a meeting with your boss, but you're just like, gee, I wonder how to do this, or I'm stuck on this, or just the little things you pick up, right?
Yeah,
especially in the earlier years.
Absolutely. And particularly in the sort of onboarding months, I think that this is something which really needs to be intentional. Onboarding is a very, and those early years are very important. And part of that is having the relationship and helping build up the relationship so that they don't feel, or they know the person enough, whether it's one of the peers on the team or their immediate manager, that they can feel just kind of going, hey, Jane, I've got this quick question. Do you mind? Whether they're, in the office and virtually, whether it's in an asynchronous chat, they don't feel, because a lot of people don't feel comfortable putting a question. They don't want to, to sound like they don't know what they're doing, or,
right.
And, so making, and that really also speak to the culture. Like, is the culture open and really encouraging people to speak up about the things that they know, speak up the things about that they don't know, so that so that you can find out what's going on and find out that where people might have issues, and that they do feel very comfortable to share ideas, to share issues, to ask those questions. So developing those relationships, but also it can require or can be beneficial to have more visits to the office, which are scheduled, purposefully scheduled, to ensure that you can have the closer knit environment with other folks. It's also clear to me, having seen over the last sort of 18 months, one of the key reasons that younger folks want to be coming into the office at particular times is that they want to interact with some of the more senior people in the organization. And part of that really is about career progression and, what's going on, what are the interesting projects that I might be able to be involved in. I want to connect with Jane because she's working in this really cool area, and I'd really like to get to know her because maybe there's a possibility that my next progression could be into her area. So these are the things that are really important that can be sort of very much facilitated by sort of visits to the office. So I think these are things which need to be thought through as well.
It's interesting because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, part of what you gain by being in the office is sort of learning by osmosis, or I don't know if that's the best choice of words, but you see other people, you overhear, you watch how someone who's senior to you handles a situation. There's just a lot of that kind of stuff that you pick up. And at the same time, those senior people are the ones typically who live further away from the office, right? And they would rather be working from home because, like you said, commutes in many parts of the world are just dreadful. So yeah, it's how all of that's going to play out, I think will be quite interesting.
Yes. And I do think that when we are more thoughtful and more purposeful about how we are working and how we are sharing our experience and how we are sharing some of the things that have worked for us. And I think that's why this next couple of years, maybe 5 years, is going to be messy, the way I see it, is that we're all trying to work it out. We've never had to be so intentional about things. We were over the last 2 years, but now as we're sort of coming to trying to sort of set ourselves up in the new normal, or whatever, however we want to talk, to call it. But as we want to set ourselves up to be successful going forward in a very new environment, these are the things we actually have to sort of think about and design for the first time ever.
Absolutely. I think you're right. It's a lot more daunting to apply this than it is to talk about it on paper, right? To conceptualize it. It all sounds good, right? Until you actually have to roll it out amongst a diverse staff with everybody's different individual lifestyle situations and personality types and so forth.
But I do see that has been what we can take from the last 2 years, because we did get much more of a sense of other people's situations. And so I think taking the last 2 years of learnings can be helpful to set up. And then it's trial and error. And it really is, there's going to be a lot of iterations to try and get this right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of the ways that we have been able to think way outside the box are going to be helpful for us to sort of tap into those memories and kind of go, well, we can do things differently. How can we set these things up? And I think, one of the things that Elon Musk does, I think is very helpful in terms of using first principles. And that's something I really believe in. It's not so as we move forward, never mind how we have been doing it from the last 2 years and before, how can we best do it now? Let's just, for a second, think about what would be the best way to do this, is the technology that they could do that for us, and then working on that basis going forward.
And I like the fact that you brought up Elon Musk, because I get so much out of learning his way of managing. And granted, the companies he runs are atypical of most companies, but still there is certain things you can take away. And getting back to what you said about meetings, he is very much against having a meeting for the sake of a meeting. His meetings have to be very intentional. You don't have to stay if you feel you have something better to do. You only need to be there if there's something you have to contribute to the meeting. So there's many different things he does, not just meetings, but that is really quite forward thinking, that at least in part, as you're suggesting, could be adapted by other companies and just rethink some of the things that we do.
Exactly. And so really taking that step back to sort of say, in a much more dynamic environment, when so much is changing, how do we provide stability? I do see this time now as being both is technology driven, but very much human centric. The way that we're going to get through this successfully for any company is really to understand and lean into their talent and try and support them and engage them to do their best work. And each person is individual, and that's not makes it complicated. But that's the reality, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely. Now, where can people find your book? I mean, I think that after everything you've shared here, I think a lot of people would be very interested in reading more and learning more.
Well, thank you so much. So Empathy Works, the key to competitive advantage in the new era of work, is available on Amazon and all online retailers wherever you want to get your books. And it really is, it sets out a framework for how to move forward, which is the sort of a human-centric system. It's both looking at the customer journey and the employee journey, and that being a way to move forward in a very turbulent, disruptive time. And there's understanding about empathy and human understanding, and then a lot of practical takeaways about how to infuse empathy in your culture, because that's a key foundation, particularly when you're connecting people across different locations. We've been able to deal with more sort of presenting a 2D version of ourselves in meetings to get things done, and that's not going to work. It's not going to cut it anymore. And dealing with the whole of everybody is more complicated. So that's what the book's about. And I really appreciate your sharing. So it comes out May 3rd, but please pre-order it. And anybody who does pre-order it can also get a free ticket to a live seminar with me. But thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Well, it sounds excellent. I'm going to put the links in the show notes for this episode. And of course, also it'll be on the website for A Seat at the Table podcast. So people will have an opportunity to be able to connect with you. I think a lot of people will. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and sharing your time.
It was wonderful speaking with you, Jane. I really, really appreciate it. I loved all your questions. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, we're adding a new feature. If you've ever listened to a podcast and thought, I have a question, well, now you can ask. We'll be letting you know about upcoming guests on our show, and you can send in your questions. Also, you can ask questions after the show, and we'll forward them to our guests for feedback. If you'd like to participate or just want to learn more, head on over to our website at seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com for all of the details. The links will also be in the show notes. You can also leave any thoughts, feedbacks, or suggestions there, and yes, I will read it. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I will see you in our next episode of A Seat at the Table.